Documents reveal a Chinese strategy to influence Canada's 2021 election. This is the Great White North Report.
I'm in love with the system, never going home. I'm in love.
The Globe and Mail broke a story about how the Canadian Security Intelligence Services had documents that reveal a Chinese strategy to influence Canada's 2021 election. And to me, this is nothing new. It claims that China employed a sophisticated strategy to disrupt Canada's democracy in 2021, as Chinese diplomats and their proxies backed the re-election of Justin Trudeau's Liberals, but only to another minority government. The Chinese didn't want a conservative majority government and worked to defeat conservative politicians considered to be unfriendly to Beijing. Apparently, the interference operations laid bare in both secret and top-secret Canadian Security Intelligence Service documents viewed by the Globe and Mail that cover the period before and after September 2021. This document was shared among senior government officials and Canada's Five Eyes intelligence allies of the United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Some of this intelligence was also shared with the French and German spy services. Now, already we're looking into allegations that China interfered in the 2019 election campaign to support 11 candidates, most of them Liberal, in the Greater Toronto area. All right, first of all, this doesn't surprise me, as the CCP would want, the Chinese Communist Party would definitely look into getting a government that's more favorable to it and would use whatever means it can. Mostly this means wherever there's a large Chinese mainland immigrant population in Canada. So we're looking mostly in Vancouver and Toronto. Pure and simple. They're not going to worry about the 10 or so Chinese mainland immigrants that live in where I am, if there's even that many, or the 50 or so that live in the whole county. And they're not going to worry about small things like that. They're going to go into the big cities, huge migrant population from the Chinese mainland, or those who have been here for a while but still have family back home, and lean on them. How do they do this? They do this through various things like WeChat, Chinese language newspapers, and Chinese language TV. So the document says that the leadership in Beijing was pressuring its consulates to create strategies to leverage politically active Chinese community members and associations within Canadian society. Right. Beijing uses Canadian organizations to advocate on its behalf, while obscuring its links to the People's Republic of China. Big business. People in the big business community who want to do business in China. The classified reports also reveal that China's former Consul General in Vancouver, Tong Jialing, boasted in 2021 about how she helped defeat two Conservative MPs. Looking at an electoral map of the 2021 election, you can see that the Conservative Party did not do well in the big cities of Vancouver and Toronto. And it goes on to say that China considered Trudeau to be the best leader for Canada, but they also want to keep Trudeau in check, so with a second Liberal minority in Parliament as the ideal outcome. So they might have also supported some NDP candidates as well, especially in Vancouver. So one consular official said that likes it when the parties in Parliament are fighting with each other, whereas if there's a majority of the party in power can easily implement policies that do not favor the PRC. So they were worried about the backlash between the Meng the Merciless and Spavor-Kovrig fallout. A minority government keeps those issues away, while a majority PC government would definitely strike back harder. Now, Trudeau is definitely a pro-Beijing person. His father was the one that opened up China to trade with Canada back in the 70s. All we had to do was switch our recognition from Taipei to Beijing. Simple as that. Now, Chinese diplomats were unhappy that the Liberals had recently become critical of China when things were going so well. But it's better than the alternatives. Actually, I think they would be more happy with the NDP, because the NDP are more socialist. And like I mentioned, like the whole Meng the Merciless period, when China-Canada relations hit rock bottom. So the documents go on to say how diplomats and their proxies, including some members of the Chinese language media, were instructed to press home that the Conservative Party was too critical of China and that if elected it would follow the lead of Trump and ban Chinese students from certain universities or education programs. We wouldn't ban students based on their ethnicity if they're Canadians. It's not that we would ban Chinese students, we would just ban Chinese students from Chinese mainland, not from Taiwan or Singapore or anywhere else. That's a distinction. But the CCP wants you to think that they alone, so the CCP wants you to think that they alone represent all Chinese people. And they don't. They definitely don't represent Chinese people living within Canada. Now, the permanent residents and the students who cannot vote anyway, why should it matter to them? Threaten the future of the voters' children as it will limit their education opportunities. So they played the racist card and it would never happen. And the official were saying the Liberal Party of Canada is becoming the only party that the PRC will support. CSIS also explained how Chinese diplomats conduct foreign interference operations in support of political candidates and elected officials. Tactics include undeclared cash donations to political campaigns. Yep. Having business owners hire international Chinese students and assign them to volunteer in electoral campaigns on a full-time basis. That is something we should not allow to do. We should not allow any international Chinese student should not get involved in Canadian politics. They cannot vote and therefore should not be allowed to volunteer. Sympathetic donors are also encouraged to provide campaign contributions to candidates favored by China. So they would have a list of candidates they would support, and they receive a tax credit from the federal government. Political campaigns quietly and illegally return part of their contribution. The difference between the original donation and the government's refund back to the donors. So it's going to influence vulnerable Chinese immigrants in Canada. The intelligence reports quote an unnamed Chinese consulate official saying it's easy to influence Chinese immigrants to agree with the PRC's stance, because most of these immigrants now come from the mainland, as opposed to places like Hong Kong and Taiwan. Why does it do this? Because China wants to broad acceptance for its claims on Taiwan, which I do not agree with. Wants to downplay its conflict in Xinjiang, where it keeps 2 million Muslim Uyghurs locked up, as well as Tibet and Falun Gong and all sorts of other fun stuff. They also seek to discourage opposition to Beijing's militarization of the South China Sea and sweeping maritime claims in the region, which has pissed off the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, who all have legitimate claims to that region. So it's well known within the Chinese-Canadian community of British Columbia that the Consul General of the PRC wanted the Liberal Party to win the 2021 election, and that they encouraged members of the Chinese-Canadian organizations to rally votes for Liberals and defeat Conservative candidates. That doesn't surprise me at all. None of this does. So Ms. Tong discussed the defeat of a Vancouver area Conservative whom she describes as a vocal distractor of the Chinese government. Now, a national security source said the MP was Kenny Shui. The Globe Mail is not identifying the source because there was prosecution. Okay, yep. Mr. Shui was targeted in retaliation for his criticism of China's crackdown in Hong Kong and his 2021 private members bill aiming to establish a registry of foreign agents, an effort inspired by similar Australian legislation to combat foreign interference, something which I'm surprised we haven't done yet. Canada is studying the matter, which means it'll take about 20 years before we decide to do it. Mr. Shui was elected to represent Stevenson Richmond East in 2019, lost the 2021 federal election to Liberal candidate Parm Baines, and is widely believed to be a victim of Beijing-led online disinformation campaign. So they definitely use WeChat. Most of the recent Chinese immigration to Canada still use Chinese apps controlled by Beijing or overseen by Beijing. WeChat is the biggest one. A lot of censorship and disinformation can happen on WeChat. Also, many of these recent Chinese immigrants to Canada who actually have Canadian citizenship, they also have families back home. The CCP will target their families, meaning their families can't get a job, cannot travel, fewer social restrictions. Remember, there is a social credit system in China. So whatever you do or say will affect your credits, your social credit score, and determine what kind of job you get, what kind of education your kids can have. There's all sorts of fun stuff. So China's efforts to influence mainland Chinese Canadian voters against the Conservative Party, and that Shui's loss proved their strategy and tactics were good and contributed to achieving their goals, while still adhering to the local political customs in a clever way. So they manipulated our own political practices. And the defeat of Shui and another Conservative MP, Alice Wong, substantiated the growing electoral influence of mainland Chinese Canadians. 30 years ago, most of our Chinese Canadians, immigrants, were from Taiwan and Hong Kong. Now, they're now mostly from the mainland. Former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole, he alleged that the Chinese interference in 2021 cost the party 8 or 9 seats. And the Conservative Party had the overall share of the popular vote, but lost a number of ridings with significant Chinese Canadian populations. So Trudeau never issued any public warnings about foreign interference during the 2019 and 2021 campaign. Why not? He won. Trudeau said he found no meddling, telling the Commons in November of last year that the task force determined the integrity of our elections was not compromised, and the Canadians can be reassured that our election integrity held. Yeah, because he was the winner. But he was told that he received a national security briefing last fall in which he was told that Canada's consulate in Toronto had targeted 11 candidates in the 2019 election, despite the consulate's attempts to promote the campaigns on social media and in Chinese language media outlets. 9 Liberal and 2 Conservative candidates were favored by Beijing, according to the national security source, and the source said the 2 Conservative candidates were viewed as friends of China, because they do have friends in all parties. If you look at an electoral map of Toronto and Vancouver, you'll find that very few Conservatives won. Toronto especially was mostly a Liberal landslide. Vancouver was a Liberal/NDP landslide. The Conservatives did very poorly in urban areas. The new Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, accuses Trudeau of ignoring the election interference by China, and why wouldn't he? It's now been a year and a half since the last election, and he's got his minority government. As long as the NDP continue to support him, he's going to remain in power until the next election. Trudeau's not going to let anything spoil his gravy train, so why would he confirm any reports that he was warned? Why would he do anything about it? He got in. He got back in with a minority government for the second time in a row. So I, for one, have no doubt that the CCP influenced our elections in certain areas, in the big cities, and it probably did affect the outcome. Would it have changed the overall picture of our election? Not so much. We would still have a liberal minority government, though it wouldn't be as strong. But hopefully we learn something, but hopefully we can counter these threats and start playing harder against the CCP. I would say kick out their consulates, make them only allowed one embassy in Canada, in Ottawa, and not allow them to have so much freedom to run things in our country. After all, they have secret police stations here. It's time to have that foreign agent registry, and it's time to face the fact that we're in the midst of a Cold War with China. And the more we get used to that idea, the better. Let me know what you guys think if the CCP interfered with our elections. And leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been the Great White North Report.
I'm in love.